Our story kicks off with a mob of angry fools hurling curses at two heroes, Dwight Harvelt and Claire Barton. Once celebrated as the wisest and strongest of humanity, they're now accused of corruption and betrayal. Thanks to a flurry of rumors spread by the royal family, people are convinced Dwight and Claire have turned evil and plan to become demon lords themselves. The kingdom's deep fear of demons pushes the crowd to madness, and they decide to cast their former heroes into the Valley of the Dead, a place with a guaranteed death sentence due to the deadly miasma. But Dwight isn't about to give up without a fight. He's shouting his innocence, pleading with the crowd to remember how he and Claire once saved them from the demon lord's army. His words, however, falls on deaf ears. The mob is too consumed by fear to listen. Then, to Dwight's horror, the king steps forward with a smug look and delivers the final blow. He calls them pawns of a cruel world and declares it a mistake to have named them heroes in the first place. Dwight, desperate and clinging to hope, begs Claire to run, but she shuts him down without hesitation. Claire declares that if their sacrifice can bring peace, then as the hero of this world, she's ready to face death. Dwight, however, refuses to accept it. He knows the rumors aren't true, and all he wants is to escape and stay by her side forever. Claire softly apologizes to Dwight for dragging him into this mess, and thanks him for standing with her through it all. In return, Dwight says he should be the one apologizing. Before they can say more, the execution order is given. Two soldiers step forward, their spears piercing the heroes' bodies, carrying out the grim task. Even as a spear pierces her chest and the light fades from her eyes, Claire keeps her smile, unshaken until the very end. As their bodies collapse and the crowd erupts in cheers, Dwight's mind churns. He watches it all and thinks about how twisted it is for a world to treat its heroes this way. In that moment, he finally understands the true essence of this world. Claire and Dwight are now in the Valley of the Dead. Dwight once thought he understood the world, but he realizes now he didn't. Dwight is unsure of how much time has passed. All he knows that he is now a living skeleton and has been holding Claire's skeletal body the entire time. For as long as he has been dead, his hatred for the ones who betrayed them has only grown stronger over time. At this moment, he came to the realization that Claire's ideology, the one he also always followed, was wrong. They believed that humans were inherently innocent and always deserved protection from evil. That is how world peace was made. After experiencing this betrayal, however, Dwight decided this world was broken. He would achieve peace using his own method, which he deemed to be more effective. But before he got started, he decided to first erase the existence of the ones who betrayed them. He wanted to remind humanity to never bite the hand that fed them. To do this, Dwight knows he needs power, enough to make the world see him as a strong and worthy opponent. Miasma is harmful to living beings, but high undead like our protagonist can absorb it to become stronger. Dwight takes in the miasma like a man possessed, but it's no walk in the park. He has to endure the grief of the dead first, a tsunami of sorrow that rips through him like hellfire. The pain was unbearable, but Dwight's hatred for the ones above was even stronger. He bounces back fast and keeps devouring the miasma, becoming an absolute powerhouse, far beyond the demon lord he once took down. With all the miasma absorbed, Dwight doesn't just stop there. He raises an army of skeletons from the dead, their bones clanking in eerie unison, ready to follow his command. Our protagonist has returned to the valley where he and Claire were executed. He approaches a soldier, grabs him by the neck and twists it until it breaks. The other soldiers are stunned and realizes this is no ordinary skeleton. They prepare to attack, but when they fire arrows at the skeleton, they are shocked to see the arrows have no effect on him. Meanwhile, the soldier Dwight killed rises as a ghoul and starts attacking its previous allies. Dwight quickly understands that this is probably one of the effects of the miasma. He also knows the soldiers are stronger and better trained in combat, but he also knows his growing skeleton army can easily overwhelm them with sheer numbers. Soon, a massive number of soldiers arrive to face Dwight, but our MC isn't worried as he only sees them as soldiers who will soon join his ever-growing undead army. Dwight then declares to the citizens of the royal capital that he will bring death upon them. At the same time, the king learns that the fortress guarding the Valley of the Dead has stopped responding, and an undead army is heading toward the royal capital. Hearing this, the king orders all the mages in the kingdom to stop the undead from reaching the gate. Obviously, things don't go as planned, and the undead horde arrives at the gate quickly. Dwight notices the mages staying back while the archers stand at the front, trying to keep the undead away. From his battles in his past life, RMC recognizes the strategy and knows it's often effective against the undead. Arrows rain down on Dwight, but the overpowered skeleton doesn't even flinch. Deciding it's time to make a statement, Dwight raises his hand, and a massive fireball starts forming, crackling with pure destruction. With a flick of his wrist, he hurls it at the gate. The fireball hits like a wrecking ball from hell, and it creates a massive hole through the gate, sending debris flying everywhere. As he surveys the aftermath, Dwight feels it in his bones, literally. This undead form isn't just stronger than his old self, it's on a whole new level. The power coursing through him is untamed and way beyond anything he'd known before. As the battle continues, panic spreads among the people and they rush to find shelter. However, the chaos causes more harm than good. Only the young and strong manage to reach safety, while children and the elderly are being trampled into the ground. Seeing this, Dwight wonders why Claire works so hard to protect these selfish people, who only think of themselves when times get hard. A father and his children find themselves face to face with RMC. The father begs the skeleton not to come closer and calls him a demon. So Dwight, without hesitation, orders one of his skeletons to attack and devour the father and his children, becoming exactly what they feared, a demon. Meanwhile, the archers prepare arrows infused with holy magic and fire them at RMC. The arrows hit their mark, causing his bones to break apart, killing him. Surely, the story doesn't end like this. The soldiers cheer, believing they have defeated the leader of the undead. But their victory is short-lived. Dwight takes over another skeleton's body and comes back to life. It is then that RMC's suspicion came true. He can switch to another skeleton's body each time he dies, and as long as his undead army exists, he cannot be truly killed. Man, that's overpowered. The soldiers are shocked to see Dwight revive before their eyes but refuse to give up as they keep firing holy arrows at him. However, Dwight is done testing his powers. Looking to put an end to the fight, he commands his skeleton dogs to attack and they begin devouring the soldiers. Dwight takes a moment to check on Claire's remains, cradled carefully like a piece of his broken soul. Meanwhile, the soldiers are losing their shit, scrambling to slam the gates shut and keep RMC and his undead mob out. Too bad for them, they're already screwed, because Dwight's at the gates and the party's just getting started. He strides forward like he owns the damn place, knowing full well these poor bastards don't stand a chance. If they want to throw hands, he'll grind them into dust without even trying. The royal mansion looms ahead, and Dwight moves through it like a predator stalking his prey. The place feels eerily familiar. He's been here too many times in his past life. Memories of the past stab at him, but he shoves them aside. The top floor, that's where the king's chambers are. Dwight makes his way up, recalling the fortress of magical barriers and curses guarding the door. This crap might have stopped a regular schmuck, but Dwight's not regular anymore, and with a single brutal move, he tears through the door like it's made of paper. Inside, the king's face twists into horror as Dwight and his undead army flood the room. The old man tries to act tough and asks the skeleton what it wants. Dwight's grin is colder than death itself as he steps closer and drops his words like a hammer.
Dwight Harvelt, does that name ring a bell?
The king struggles to believe that Dwight has returned after 10 years have passed, and RMC replies that he is surprised as well. Suddenly, a group of ghouls holds the king down, and he demands to be released. Dwight calmly says that he has returned from the Valley of the Dead to bring peace to this broken world. The king dismisses this, calling it nonsense. He reminds Dwight that many people have been executed in the valley, but none of them ever came back as the undead. Dwight doesn't care about this, and instead questions the king about why he betrayed him and Claire. Dwight talks about Claire, saying she wanted nothing but peace and didn't deserve to die. The king explains that after the demon lord's defeat, the world began to change. With those changes, heroes became a problem. The king admits that heroes, with their great power, were no longer needed and could threaten the kingdom's stability. Dwight angrily asks if the king had them executed purely for his own self-interest and to protect his position. The king sternly confirms, adding that as the rightful king, he had to get rid of them. Fed up with the king's words, Dwight commands the ghouls to devour him, and they obey like little children. As the ghouls attack, the king says with his last breath that he was right to execute the two heroes. Dwight then sees that there is a sword on display on the wall. After taking the sword in his grasp, Dwight immediately begins to feel as if he has been using this sword for all these years. Without even swinging it properly, Dwight can tell it's Claire's sword. It seems as if the miasma has given Dwight sword techniques for all the corpses that he devoured. He then begins to think if it is okay for him to take it, but decides that he should keep it as a parting gift from Claire. Just like that, Dwight has taken over the kingdom, and its previous occupants has been added to his ever-growing undead army. Even after taking his revenge, RMC understands that his battle is just beginning. As part of the next phase of his mission, he decides to use the fallen royal palace as his base of operations. A few miles away from the kingdom, a traveler stops his horse wagon, staring in shock at the large waves of miasma rising from the royal capital. Inside the city, Dwight tries to drink wine but realizes he can neither eat nor drink anything. Dense clouds of miasma now cover the capital, making it impossible for humans to live there, and the city that was full of life just yesterday now looks like the Valley of the Dead. Yet Dwight feels no regret for what he has done, as he believes that humanity must struggle to survive. He then remembers how the Demon Lord once became a great threat to humanity. Everyone united to defeat him, and even crossed national borders to work together. However, this unity disrupted the balance of the world, because even after the Demon Lord was defeated, peace did not come. Instead, the world fell into chaos, and nations that once stood together began fighting each other, causing multiple civil wars. Our MC's mind then snaps back to the present, his thoughts cold and calculated. He's convinced that real peace can only be achieved if a being with unquestionable power appears to create it. So in his twisted logic, our MC decides to become that being, the most overwhelming force the world has ever seen. But he's no fool. He knows that to pull this off he can't show his hand too prematurely, and he can't let anyone sniff out his true intentions before he's unstoppable. To become the ruler of this new world, our MC understands he needs the most powerful army, and while he already commands a horde of undead, it's not enough. What he really needs is a powerful servant that he can rely on, and that's where his genius comes in. Our MC then goes through the motion, combining multiple of his skeletons into one powerful being. When he finishes, a new servant stands before him, a twisted masterpiece, its body stitched together from the remains of the fallen, each piece bound to Dwight's will. He is confident that this skeleton that stands before him is strong enough to rival even the Demon King he defeated in the past. The skeleton asks our MC if he is its creator, and Dwight tells it yes. However, Dwight notices he does not have control over the skeleton yet. Still, he feels relieved that they are able to communicate calmly without a fight. But this peaceful moment doesn't last, because the skeleton suddenly goes berserk and begins rampaging. It quickly attacks Dwight, throwing a lightning strike at him. Dwight manages to defend himself, and retaliates by creating a magic ball, which he launches at the skeleton, knocking it back. Impressed by Dwight's power, the skeleton is now certain that his opponent is indeed its creator. However, this does not stop the skeleton. It turns its miasma into wings and prepares to fight again. Dwight observes the skeleton's remarkable miasma control, recalling the earlier lightning strike. He knows that in terms of control, the skeleton is far superior. However, Dwight has honed his magic over the years and was once called a sage. Using his skill, he launches a powerful wind attack to reflect the rampaging skeleton's fire attack back at him. This, however, angered the skeleton, and it decides to power up to its full strength while gathering all the surrounding energy into a massive attack. Each bolt of lightning has enough destructive power to be considered high-level magic. With the surrounding area obliterated from its attack, the rampaging skeleton laughs aloud at its victory, believing he has defeated its creator, but then he hears a voice.
That was a pretty good show.
Arising from behind his shields, Dwight raises his hand and sends multiple miasma spears at the rampaging skeleton, effortlessly sending it flying. Regaining control of its movements, the skeleton tries to counterattack, but Dwight was tired of the rebellious child, and smacks it to the ground with just a wave of his hand. He then approaches the skeleton while trying to de-escalate the situation, but the damn thing's got some nerve, and responds by summoning multiple miasma weapons while charging at our MC. In response, Dwight summons Claire's sword along with all her experience, and with one swing he cuts down the rampaging skeleton. Defeated, the skeleton then asks Dwight to kill him, but our MC refuses. He explains that he didn't create the skeleton just to destroy him again. Instead, Dwight tells the skeleton he wants him to be his subordinate. While Dwight could easily force him to obey, he respects free will and asks if the skeleton will willingly lend him his strength, as Dwight knows how valuable an undead like this skeleton is, and hopes for his cooperation. Fortunately, the skeleton agrees. 3 days later, most of the bodies and debris from the area have been cleaned up, because Dwight's new subordinate has been doing an excellent job. The skeleton, now named Grom, approaches his master and tells him he has prepared food for him in the dining hall, while proudly adding that he worked hard on it. Dwight has to remind Grom that he is a skeleton and cannot eat or drink anything. He wonders how Grom became so different. Since becoming Dwight's loyal follower, Grom's former hostility has completely disappeared and now will do anything requested by its master at a moment's notice. By now you might be wondering why Dwight has not revived Claire's skeletal body to be by his side. The truth is, Dwight found that he simply cannot. When he first summoned his army, Claire's skeletal remains were part of the ones he intended to revive, but for some reason, it refused to come back to him. While wondering on what the issue might be, Grom rushes in the room and informs his master that a human army from the nearest territories has started marching to the capital, intending to recapture it from the undead. Although Dwight expected such a response, he is surprised that it only took them 3 days to put together such an army. With a nod, he tells Grum he's heading out to officially introduce himself, and asks him to hold the fort while he's gone. Grum is excited to be given such an important task by his master, and he vows to protect the base with his life. Before Dwight leaves though, Grum calls out to him. Before he heads out, Grum hooks him up with some new clothes, making Dwight look like he's ready to tear the world apart. Within a few seconds after departing, Dwight is already hovering over the approaching human army. He sees the army of around 20,000 men, all equipped with holy magic armor. Although he is still confused on how they managed to gather such a large force in just 3 days, Dwight has no intention of letting them march towards the royal capital. Believing this is the best way to minimize future casualties, Dwight decides to make an example of the 20,000 soldiers approaching his territory. He thinks back to his fight with Grum, and remembers how Grum skillfully controlled miasma. Inspired, Dwight decides to try manipulating miasma himself. He creates a large black floating ball in the sky, leaving the soldiers confused. Unsure of what it is, the soldiers shoot at the dark ball hoping it will disappear. Instead, the opposite happens. The ball begins to emit lightning and shows signs of breaking apart. The soldiers realize something terrible is about to happen, but it is too late to escape. The ball explodes, releasing an enormous wave of miasma, and the impact is so powerful that the entire area is reduced to ashes. The 20,000 men who once seemed to be in great quantity have reduced to only a few who are badly injured. Dwight has successfully fused magic with miasma, and the remaining few soldiers begin to run to save their lives, but easily get caught by the undead who begin turning them. However, a few manage to escape, and Dwight decides lets them go, because he wants them to report to the world that a new menace has arrived. Dwight thinks about how good humanity has had it since the defeat of the last demon lord 10 years ago, and it's about time the world encounters a new nightmare that is about to drag them all into the abyss. He also remembers how his teleportation used to be limited to just the distance he could see as a human, but now, he is teleporting beyond anything he thought was possible, and it's like the rules don't apply to him anymore. Curious, Dwight commands his army of undead soldiers to march toward the Valley of the Dead. As they jump off the cliff, Dwight feels his powers growing stronger. He quickly realizes that the Valley of the Dead is the source of his strength. It seems that his existence as an undead is closely tied to the miasma in the valley. With this in mind, our MC decides to sacrifice the undead more often to keep increasing his power. Instead of returning to the castle immediately, Dwight walks through the streets of the royal capital. He observes the devastation all around, destroyed buildings, despair, chaos, and suffering. Despite all of this, Dwight feels no regret for the path he has chosen. The once noble and determined sage no longer exists. Now, only an immortal, mass-slaughtering demon lord remains. After walking for a long time, Dwight finally reaches the castle and notices that its exterior has been completely transformed. He immediately realizes that there can only be one culprit for this, and that is Grum. Soon, Dwight walks in and questions Grum why the exterior of the castle has changed. Grum explains that he has changed the design of the castle to one befitting a demon lord's abode, and asks his master if he likes it. Dwight can sense the passion in Grum's eyes, and although the exterior of the castle has been changed, he realizes that Grum also employed many magical techniques to improve the castle's defenses, and anyone who dares to enter the castle uninvited would be burnt to a crisp. Dwight says he is pleased that the castle's defense has improved, but tells Grum to consult with him next time before doing anything. All of a sudden, a huge army of monsters begins to appear in front of the castle, but it is only after their arrival that Dwight and Grum sense them. Grum questions his master if he is aware of who they are, and upon seeing the young lady leading them, our MC responds that yes, he has fought them in the past. Dwight explains that the girl once served the previous demon lord as one of the 4 heavenly kings, and suggests they should welcome their guest. The girl turns to the skeleton and asks if he's the new demon lord. Dwight confirms this while jokingly adding that he's a self-proclaimed one. Grum, enraged by the succubus's informal tone with his master, tells her to get the F out. However, the girl quickly senses Dwight's energy within the skeleton, and asks if he is the reincarnation of the mage who defeated her in the past. Dwight confirms her suspicion, and recognizes her as Luciana, prompting the succubus to remark on how much the former sage has changed. After some initial exchanges, Luciana asks to come inside, explaining that her army is exhausted, but the miasma surrounding the castle is too harsh for her monsters. Once inside, Dwight directly questions Luciana's motives, while Grum is growing increasingly wary of the succubus. Luciana teases Grom that he should relax, because she and his master share a long history. Dwight confirms that while they were enemies in the past, those days are behind them. Luciana then reveals that after the previous Demon Lord's death, the remnants of his army were overwhelmed by humans, so she and the rest of the army had no choice but to go in hiding, while waiting for the next Demon Lord to appear. If the new Demon Lord, however, turned out to be weak, she would simply take over him, but realizes that this is not the case with Dwight. Thereupon, Luciana proposes to offer her loyalty to Dwight in exchange for their safety. Dwight explains that his only interest is to maintain world peace, and Luciana says she wants the same as she is tired of fighting and running. Before accepting her proposal, Grom pulls his master aside and asks if they can truly trust the succubus. Within his mind, RMC thinks about the implications of letting the army of monsters roam free, and ultimately decides it would be better to have them join him. He then explains to Grom that if Luciana ever showed signs of betrayal, he would leave it up to him to take care of her. Upon arriving back in the room, Dwight agrees with Luciana's proposal. He will take her and the monster army in, while they have to fight for him in exchange. This led the succubus to grow excited and hug Dwight, mentioning that she is attracted to strong auras. Finally getting fed up with her behavior, Grom punches Luciana away from his dear master. Luciana tells Grom that he needs to play nicer because even though he is strong, he is not as strong as her new master, and she is only interested in the strongest. The two then start bickering, and yelling at each other like a couple who's been married for 20 years, while RMC slowly makes his way out of the room. We then cut to a nearby territory defending themselves against Dwight's undead army. Because his skeletons were not doing as well as he had hoped, Dwight allows Luciana's monsters to fight in the battle, and uses his transfer magic to carefully destroy the kingdom piece by piece. So far, the plan is going well, but Grom is going overboard as always by creating big explosions, while yelling that they should fear his master. Dwight tells him to not go overboard as the goal is to not kill everyone, but Grom whispers in his master's ear that his attacks aren't actually targeting anyone, and he is just scaring them with the explosions and his scary laugh. After Grom goes back to putting on his Oscar-worthy performance, we cut to the Lord of the City shitting himself at the situation he found himself in. To make things worse for the poor guy, RMC and Grom suddenly appears in front of him before he can make his escape. Upon seeing all of the jewelry and treasures dropped by the not-so-poor guy, Dwight realized that the selfish guy planned on running away while sacrificing everybody else in his city. For that reason, RMC judged him unworthy of living in the new world he was creating. And let's just say you would not want to go out the same way he did. RMC spares the Lord's remaining family, but warns that if they want to avoid the same fate, then they should submit to him. As he walks out, Dwight considers his actions as necessary to assert his dominance in this world, and he believes that by repeating these invasions, the surrounding lords will be quick to submit to him. With that in mind, he also recognizes that this will eventually lead to the humans being united to try to take him out once and for all, like they did with the previous Demon Lord. He meets with Luciana outside, and explains to her that the day's plans went better than expected because of her and her army's help. The succubus smiled brightly while exclaiming that she is glad they were of some help to him. Luciana then immediately proposes to have some alone time with Dwight as a reward, leading Grom to interfere, and remind the Demon Lord to not accept the succubus's invitation, because he is sure she has some ulterior motives. And before you even know it, the two are once again involved in an argument with each other, as if they are married. Meanwhile, Dwight realizes that he has reached a point where various lands will be turned into battlefields from this point on, and that this is the beginning of an all-out war. No foreign countries have acted yet because the attacks of the undead are only happening inside the kingdom. They are watching from afar, amused by the Demon Lord's actions. To shake them out of their comfort, Dwight decides to take a more aggressive approach. He wonders how long these nations can stay uninvolved, thinking the problem doesn't affect them. Dwight quickly calls a meeting with Grom and Luciana. Grom, as usual, speaks for the group, informing that the Demon Lord's army already controls most of the kingdom. Although the borders and strongholds of the great nobles are still standing, their supply lines are cut, so it's only a matter of time before they surrender. The next step is clear. They need to focus on the neighboring countries, but one country, in particular, must be dealt with soon. Dwight points to the map, mentioning that their first target is a small nation to the southwest. He further reveals that this country has been acting strangely. The country has gathered an army near the kingdom's border, likely planning to take the royal capital. But there's something odd. This small nation has far more weapons and supplies than usual, and it's clear that a bigger and more powerful country is secretly supporting them. Dwight wants it to be known that the Demon Lord's threat isn't just a kingdom problem, it's a global issue. No matter who is helping the Southwest nation, Dwight decides they need to attack it to send that message. His plan is clear: invade the nation, crush its forces, and find out who is controlling it from the shadows. But first, Dwight wants to make sure his soldiers are ready. Over the past months, the monsters in his army have trained hard and grown much stronger. Their efforts have transformed the royal capital too. Moreover, the dark miasma that once covered the city has been drawn toward the Demon King's castle, making the city livable again. In addition, the damaged areas are being rebuilt, and the city is thriving under his new leadership. As Dwight observes the progress, he notices something strange. There's a human in the city, and Luciana explains that she uses surviving humans as slaves. Even though the human is a slave, Dwight observes that he is not being mistreated by the monsters, and they are treating him like an equal. The sight was something he had never dreamed of, even in his most hopeful moments. Seeing this fills him with happiness, and a deep longing for the peace he has always wanted. But he knows this fragile peace is only possible because the capital has a small population with him as its ruler. Achieving the same peace across the entire world would be nearly impossible. As Dwight thinks about this, his thoughts go to Claire. Even with all the power he has gained in his battles, it's still not enough to bring her back. He holds on to the hope that when the peaceful world she dreamed of becomes real, he will be able to see her again. Dwight's thoughts are suddenly interrupted by Grom, who informs him that everything is ready for his speech. The Demon Lord steps out of his castle to face his soldiers, who are eager to hear him speak. He starts right away by acknowledging their different reasons for being there. Some want war, others seek revenge, and some want to settle old grudges. Regardless of their reason, to be successful and dominate their opponents, they must fight as one. 10 years ago, a hero and her loyal mage fought against and defeated the previous Demon Lord. That, however, was not the end of the mage's story. At the end of his life, he discovered that the current system of the world is a broken one. Dwight's voice grows darker as he tells his army that they must fight against this imperfect system. We will no longer be weak, we will no longer be ignored, we will rise even if it means embracing the role of villains. With his voice booming across the entire city, RMC declares that this is the start of a new Demon Lord's era. The soldiers cheer loudly and their excitement filled the air, while Dwight feels satisfied now knowing he was able to inspire them. But he keeps his true goal of peace a secret because if anyone found out prematurely, it could ruin his plans. Humans would no longer fear him, and he would lose his power over them. Though Grom does not fully understand why his master is seeking peace with the humans instead of destroying them, he decides not to question it because his master knows best. For the next invasion, Luciana and her army will lead the operation, while Grom stays behind to manage the kingdom. The plan is to teleport the demon army right on top of the unsuspecting country to give them the surprise advantage. As usual, Luciana can't resist teasing Grom when they're together, leading to another argument. However, this time it's more playful than serious. Before they leave, Dwight takes a moment to check their forces: 200 monsters and 1,500 undead. The numbers might seem small to take over a nation, but with the Demon Lord leading, it's more than enough. The time has come, and Dwight is confident the battle will be quick and he of course will be victorious. Meanwhile, one of Luciana's subordinates has been watching the enemy closely, making sure no surprise attacks can happen. When they teleport into position, the spell is so precise that it catches the enemy off guard. Dwight immediately uses a spell to make his voice louder and offers the enemy a chance to surrender. But before he can even finish speaking, the human army attacks with magic, making it clear that they don't want peace. Luciana smugly reminds Dwight that humans are foolish and don't listen. Left with no other option, RMC casts a powerful spell that destroys the oncoming attack and collapses part of the bridge the humans were using as their base. He inwardly thinks the humans made their choice and now they must face the consequences before ordering his army to attack. The humans try to block their advance by sending ships into the river, but the undead don't need to breathe because they sneak underwater and destroy the ships from below. The story is no different on the bridge as the orcs and monsters are overwhelming the humans with their strength, making way for the rest of the army to invade. Luciana watches the chaos with a smile, sipping wine as if she's enjoying a festival. Dwight finds her behavior a bit careless but decides not to say anything since he isn't taking the situation too seriously either. For now, Dwight stays out of the fight. This is a test for his monsters, and it's their job to win. With the canal secured, the army moves toward the city. Their next goal is the royal capital. He suspects other nations may have pressured this kingdom into starting the conflict. If they can take over the royal castle, they might find proof of this interference. Luciana informs Dwight that any country involved in reckless plans should be punished quickly to prevent such things from happening in the future. After the fighting has gone on for a while, the succubus becomes bored and expresses that even though this country is small, it should still have some strong people in it. Her comments trigger Dwight's memory that in his past life, only he and Claire were strong enough to face the Demon Lord's army. He notes that people of that kind of strength do not show up too often, because after all, it had been 10 years since his death, and no one of Claire's caliber has appeared. Luciana snaps him back to the present by asking if he is reminiscing of his past life. She playfully calls him Dwight Quinn, which is the nickname she had for him back when he was still alive. To her surprise, however, the Demon Lord sternly told her to not call him that, as he has discarded that name and identity. This prompts Luciana to show a more serious side of her, by reminding him that even though he is now the Demon Lord, his identity as Dwight is not something to be discarded, and it's part of what makes him who he is. RMC was taken back by the succubus's words, but he started to panic when she got on top of him with a serious look still on her face, asking if he would mind telling her more about himself. Dwight tries to brush it off, saying that they need to focus on the battle happening in front of them, but Luciana held on to his face, asking him to please value himself more. Realizing the girl won't be satisfied without an answer, Dwight tells her okay, he will make more of an effort to do so. Facing the other direction now, Luciana quietly reminds Dwight that Grom is not the only one who cares about him, and he should not hesitate to come to her with the troubles he is facing. After RMC confirms that he will think of her a bit more from now on, the girl fires off a giant magical attack at the enemy, before turning around and sweetly telling him to please do. The scene then switches to Grom, who is enjoying cleaning up the base, before he is startled by a nearby skeleton suddenly possessed by Dwight. Grom is able to immediately recognize his master, because any skeleton possessed by him turns black, and Dwight tells Grom that he is just there to inform him that the invasion is going as planned. Of course, Grom excitedly tells his master that he is not surprised, because no one in the world can stand against his awesome power. Well, it seems that Grom might have spoken too soon, because Luciana is rushing over to RMC and informs him that they ran into an issue in the prison, where someone is taking out all of the skeletons that approach. Dwight is surprised that someone so powerful was in such a small country, and wonders if he is on the level of a hero. Well folks, he might be, because he is blowing away all of the skeletons without even touching them. Without delay, the both of them quickly make their way to the individual who is making a massive dent in the undead army. As they fly, Dwight thinks about how the world has a habit of creating strong individuals whenever it is threatened by evil, and this might be one of those cases. When they arrive, the man immediately recognizes Dwight as the leader of the army and challenges him to a one-on-one fight. Before Dwight has a chance to dismiss the man's challenge, however, the man suddenly attacked and destroys his bottom jaw with a single powerful kick. Dwight and Luciana did not even get the chance to even process what happened, before the man fires a deadly punch that shatters RMC's magical barrier. Realizing the danger, Dwight quickly jumps back to avoid the attack, and creates some distance between him and the brawler. The brawler taunts him and calls him a scaredy cat. In response, Dwight unleashes a giant skull-shaped fireball in the man's direction, and it destroys everything in its path. Luciana quickly checks on her master, and Dwight confirms that he is okay. Inwardly, he thinks that the man is a monster who not only broke his barrier using his fist, but the bastard also has the toughness to survive his giant fire skull attack. As the brawler reveals that he blocked the attack with only one hand, Luciana cannot believe what she is seeing, and this prompts Dwight to reveal that the man's name is Henry Blaken. While explaining that Henry is an undefeated warrior who is said to be the closest thing to a demon lord killer, Henry once again goes on the offensive and heads straight for Dwight. Dwight is firing invisible slashes towards the approaching brawler, but all of the slashes are being casually dodged. As the two powerhouses are exchanging blows, Dwight is inwardly analyzing Henry's fighting style. He notes that the man's fighting techniques is not at all too complex. Henry can take hold of his opponent's attack and redirect them with the almost unparalleled strength as a result of training past his limits. Even with surprise attacks, Henry will dodge on instinct as that has been trained past its limits as well. Dwight points out that even though Henry does not possess any special abilities and cannot use magic, his pure strength and grit makes him an exceptional being who cannot be ignored. Throughout the fight, Dwight has been gradually spreading miasma in the area and Henry has finally noticed. But before he can say anything, Henry's opponent proposes that they make a bet. The skeleton proposes that if he defeats Henry, Henry has to join his army, and if Henry wins, the skeleton will grant him any wish that is within his power. Henry thinks about the proposal, and agrees to it while also explaining that if he does win, he wants the skeleton to hand over his undead army to him. Man, this crazy guy is ambitious. But it was Henry's reasoning that made Dwight want him even more. Henry explains that he had been in that boring prison for the last 10 years. Now that he is out, he figured it would be fun to go to war with the rest of the world. Although Dwight likes Henry's enthusiasm, he feels a bit disrespected that this man would even think of replacing him. The second round of the battle starts as Dwight summons multiple skeletons to intercept the approaching brawler. Of course, Henry easily dispatches the weak skeletons, but they bought Dwight enough time for him to fire a massive frontal shockwave attack. With the shockwave covering such a big area, Henry had no choice but to block and dig his feet into the ground to avoid being blown away. As Dwight watches Henry slowly powering through the shockwave that can blow away a small city, he smiles inwardly, before unleashing his real power and increasing the shockwave's magical output. The increase in Dwight's power shocks Henry, who cannot believe how strong the black skeleton actually is. Even though Henry tried his best to resist the attack, he is eventually overwhelmed, and the pupils disappears from his eyes as he is smashed through the wall. The attack, however, did not come without consequences to our MC, as he lost both of his arms by performing it. Maybe he forgot he can simply possess another skeleton. Or maybe Dwight's mind is preoccupied with what he is witnessing in front of him. Henry is back on his feet with only a few bruises. Knowing that it must have taken the man a lot of energy to get back up, Dwight decides to make the first move, and sends out a giant snake that quickly turns into black chains as it wraps around the tired brawler. Even Henry knows that he has reached his limits, and decides to yield. With the battle reaching its end, Dwight declares that from this day onward Henry Blaken will serve under him, and the brawler reaches his hand out in acceptance. When evil threatens the world, heroes will emerge to put a stop to it, as fate will not allow its existence. As we are reminded of this fact, we cut to a scene where a young girl is sitting on a flower bed while a young man is running to her. The new chapter kicks off with Dwight and Henry meeting up with Luciana in the capital city, where she's already charmed and seduced every single one of its leaders. With them under her spell, Dwight knows getting the information they need will be a lot easier. He thanks the succubus for her handiwork and Luciana graciously accepts the praise. Then her gaze shifts to the human man, wondering why he is still alive. Dwight confirms that Henry is now part of the team, and the two exchange introductions. As Dwight tries to peel the overly affectionate Luciana off his arm, the trio makes their way to the country's treasury, a vault bursting with gold, jewels, and treasures. Luciana's eyes light up like a kid in a candy store, and her attention is immediately drawn to a crown. She holds it up, tilts her head, and asks Dwight, "Does this match my eyes?" Meanwhile, Henry zeroes in on what he's here for, a unique bow made from dragon parts. It was confiscated from him a decade ago when he surrendered himself. Wait, I thought this guy was a fighter? To prove otherwise, Henry takes the bow, knocks an arrow, and fires. The arrow streaks through the air like a comet, tearing through a distant castle and bringing the entire structure crashing to the ground. The sheer destruction leaves Dwight speechless, but Henry nonchalantly shrugs it off and mutters that he must be rusty. Dwight observes the scene with a mix of amusement and calculation. Henry's raw strength is undeniable, but as his master, Dwight feels the need to assert his superiority. With no bow in sight, Dwight summons an arrow and unleashes it. The projectile screams through the air, traveling far beyond Henry's shot before colliding with a mountain in the distance. In an instant, half the peak crumbles away, leaving an enormous scar on the landscape. Henry is left stunned, his jaw practically on the floor, while Luciana smirks knowingly and tells him he will get used to it. In a small town not far from the mountain, panic grips the citizens who witness the destruction caused by the demon lord's arrow. Among the chaos, a young man sprints toward his little sister, who is calmly sitting on a flower bed and is obviously oblivious to the growing tension around her. He urges her to evacuate with the rest of the townsfolk and explains that, as a soldier now, he has to stay behind to defend their home. His little sister, however, doesn't take this news well. She looks at him with concern and protests while teasing him that he's not even that much stronger than her. Despite her light-hearted jab, there's genuine worry in her voice, but the young man smiles and reassures her that no matter what happens, he will not let anything happen to her. Meanwhile, in the Demon Lord's capital, Dwight's army has returned victorious from their latest invasion. Henry surveys the city as they approach, and he's struck by the sight. What was once a bustling human settlement is now teeming with monsters of every kind. Luciana notices Henry's reaction and studies him curiously. She seems surprised that he isn't upset about Dwight wiping out the human population and replacing them with monsters. But Henry brushes the idea off with casual indifference. He reasons that humans kill each other all the time, so what does it matter if monsters are the ones doing the killing now? His unflinching pragmatism strikes a chord with the succubus, who finds the answer acceptable. With that, Luciana officially acknowledges Henry as part of their group. As they approach the castle, Henry's eyes are drawn to its unusual and somewhat eccentric decorations. Before Dwight can clarify that the design choices weren't his doing, a loud, booming voice echoes across the hallway. It's of course Grom, rushing forward in a burst of excitement to greet his master, after what seems like ages apart. The skeleton skids to a stop in front of Dwight, and immediately drops to one knee in a dramatic bow. However, Grom's joy is short-lived. As he rises, he notices something strange. There's a human standing among them. His expression twists in confusion, and he stammers as he questions why a human has been allowed inside the castle. Before anyone can answer, Henry steps forward and casually introduces himself, completely unbothered by the tension in the air. Grom, however, is far less composed, and yells at the sheer audacity of a human addressing him so casually. Sensing the brewing storm, Luciana leans in close to Henry, and quietly remarks that this is just how Grom is, easily provoked and quick to posture. As the trio exchanges words, Luciana amused, Henry unfazed, and Grom increasingly agitated, Dwight remains silent while observing the scene with an odd mix of amusement and relief. Internally, he notes that Grom is actually handling the situation better than expected. Though clearly unhappy about the human's presence, Grom knows that any decision involving someone entering the castle would have been made by Dwight himself. Out of respect and loyalty, Grom reins himself in, careful not to overstep any unspoken boundaries. 50 days have passed since Henry joined the army, and Dwight has watched him quickly win over the monster forces with his natural leadership. Henry took it upon himself to train them in hand-to-hand combat and archery, and his efforts have turned the army into a well-oiled machine. Under his instruction, they've crushed every opponent they've faced with ease. Yet, despite Henry's presence and the army's growing strength, Dwight remains cautious. He knows they are far from invincible, and becoming overconfident in their victories could lead to ruin. As if to confirm Dwight's fears, the scene shifts to the small town under siege by his undead army. The young boy stands frozen, overwhelmed as he watches everything he knows reduced to ruin. His paralysis is shattered by a scream, and when he turns, he sees his little sister surrounded by skeletons. Desperation surges through him as he charges toward her, yelling her name. Though he fights ferociously, cutting down the skeletons in his path, he's too late to save her. Back at the demon castle, Dwight listens to Luciana's report on her interrogations of the Southwest country's leaders. Midway through her findings, Grom bursts in, his face grim as he delivers terrible news. He tells the story of how the young boy was forced to strike down his own sister after she was turned into a ghoul. Consumed by grief, the boy recalls their precious moments together, his sorrow twisting into seething rage. As his emotions reach their peak, an immense and unknown power surges through him, strong enough to part the clouds in the sky. The boy's hopeful, innocent eyes are gone, replaced by a fiery resolve fueled by anger and a thirst for vengeance. Grom, who witnessed the transformation, announces to his master, "A hero has emerged." Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe to not miss out on part 2.